I do think, though, there's a kind of an easy case to make against Pius XII, which is we don't have any film of him ever coming out on the loggia there and condemning Adolf Hitler, calling this whole thing racist, saying that what he did know, in fact, which was Jews are being murdered by the thousands in Poland and in Germany. He didn't do it. We don't have the video of him saying that. We don't have the film of him saying that, which is the kind of, I think many people to take as a proof that he was a moral coward.
Yes. Well, the easiest answer to that is what happened when the Dutch bishops spoke out? The Dutch bishops did speak out in a very public and I would even say flamboyant way against the Nazis. And it's all well and good. I'm sure it felt very cathartic. But what happened as a result of that? Many, many Jews were slaughtered. And Pius XII, and we now can know this actually from the historical record, realized that if he were to do the same thing, it might provide some good PR for him. The result would be for him as the Pope, a million Jews could be slaughtered. We know that he was working behind the scenes to protect the Jews of Rome and did save many. And we know actually because of his leadership and the care of the church, many hundreds of thousands of Jews were saved. Something like 800,000 Jews were saved during the Second World War. We know that the ones in his immediate vicinity, he was intervening on their behalf and establishing ways for them to get out of Europe and documents for them to leave. We know that he was hiding them in Castel Gandolfo and other places. We know that before he ascended to the seat of Peter, when he was the papal nuncio, the Secretary of State, he was working with Pope Pius XI on Mitbrenner Sorge, on plenty of other, papal letters to get out in the vernacular to try to stem the tide of Nazism. But the question would become, what would be better for him to do? To make a big show for himself, even if it meant that many Jews would be killed, or to work behind the scenes and suffer a kind of white martyrdom? And I know what the Christian thing to do is, and it happens to be what he did, and it resulted in much greater good.
If people can convince you that the Catholic Church is just morally cowardly and hypocritical, you're not going to want to join that group. And it seems to me that that is part of the story of Pius XII is he's presented to the world as this man who failed the greatest moral test of the 20th century. Is that who he was?
It's a complete lie, and it's just nonsense. And I guess the proof of that is that a lot of the historical revision comes about decades later. It really begins with a work of fiction, actually, a play in the 1960s that then was built upon by historical revisionists in the 1990s. In fact, that fiction was promoted literally by the KGB and communist agents. And then, but really, the fight
the deputy.
over the deputy
right?
was the play.
The play was the deputy, yeah.
The play was never put on in its entirety because the play was 8 hours long. It was total fiction. I mean, and no honest person could say it was actually advancing historical fact. And it was a rant, but it was seized upon by enemies of the church to promote this calumny. I remember encountering that book, Hitler's Pope, in the late 90s, I guess.
Yeah.
But again, it's a lot of nonsense that is refuted not only by the documents, some of which have come out since from the Vatican, but even by Hitler's own words. Hitler wrote a letter to Francisco Franco and said that he considered Pius XII his personal enemy. There's a lot of good evidence that Hitler was planning to, at the very least, kidnap and probably execute the Pope, not the sort of thing you do to your friend. And also, there's the historical fact that Pius was basically the last guy standing in Rome. So after the King of Italy had fled, after Mussolini had left, there was Pius standing alone to say, I will not surrender the Holy See, and I will not surrender Rome to the Nazis. And I guess one final bit, though, one could speak for hours and hours in defense of Pius. But here's one final proof. At the end of the war, the chief rabbi of Rome, Israel Zoli, converted to Catholicism. Not only did he convert to Catholicism, which would be a strange thing to do if the Catholic Church had abandoned the Jewish people during this great moral test. Not only did he do that, he took the name Eugenio, which is Pius XII's Christian name, to be his name when he was baptized. So this is a man who held Pius XII in great esteem, as should we all, because not only did he not do anything wrong or fail any moral tests, he was an exemplar of moral courage during the Second World War, as he was for his career.
And we were delighted to find that Michael had done a 4-part series on Pope Pius XII, who you will not be surprised to learn we agree with him, is much maligned, a tremendous unfairness. The Pope and the Fuhrer, the secret Vatican files of World War II, is available now at the Daily Wire. You can check it out there. You start one of the videos with kind of evoking the fake news of our day, and I think the way you kind of say it, I won't be able to quote it, but nobody got more fake newsed than Pius XII. He got the ultimate fake news treatment.
Yes, yeah, it was just awful. It's one of the worst historical calumnies I've ever seen, certainly in recent memory, and I think what a lot of it was about, because as we mentioned in the earlier block, everyone agreed that Pius was a moral and courageous man during the war. Everyone agreed shortly after the war that Pius XII was a moral and courageous man. The calumny against him really didn't begin until a decade and a half later, just about. And so that has to raise your suspicions, not just on the fake news and these kinds of fights, but what the fight is really about. And I think a lot of the battle over the legacy of Pius XII was, one, a battle waged by the enemies of the church, promoted by the KGB, for instance, but also it was a little bit of an intra-Catholic fight. The fact that it kicked off in the 1960s, I think, is no coincidence. As there were debates over the future of the church, what the church would look like in the wake of the Second Vatican Council and all of the reforms that followed, there were figures who were trying to argue that we really ought to ignore church history and church tradition, who were looking forward to a new springtime for the church. And, one of the stubborn figures for them, I think, was Pope Pius XII, who was this figure of humility, of courage, of care, of selflessness, but also who was a figure of tradition. And so I do wonder if part of the promotion of these historically nonsense calumnies against Pius XII, easily refuted as we do in the Daily Wire series, I wonder if part of that was a little bit of a civil war within the church for the not the past of the church, but what the future of the church would look like.
Betsy in Dearborn, thanks for the call. Betsy, go ahead with your question for Michael Knowles.
Hi. The question I have is, there is a group of people who tout themselves as the true Catholic Church called Sedevacantists. They recognize Pope Pius XII as the last vicar of Christ. Did he foresee Vatican II on the horizon? And this whole Sedevacantist thing.
Yes, there have been schisms and heresies and all sorts of things since antiquity. So I guess what makes Sedevacantism a little different than some of the modern stuff we see is that Sedevacantism is wrapped in the garb of tradition. Just a reminder that schism and heresy can come in all forms, and it doesn't favor just one aesthetic or another. But yes, the claim is that the seat of Peter is empty. Sede vacante. I once accidentally went to a Sedevacantist church, I guess. I sort of stumbled on one, and I realized something was a little bit up through the liturgy. This was many years ago at this point. But I suppose the reason that I've never been attracted to Sedevacantism or groups that are out of communion with the Catholic Church is because it seems to me just like another form of Protestantism. And I don't mean to be so dismissive, because there were a lot of problems that occurred in the middle and latter part of the 20th century, as there have been lots of problems that have occurred throughout the history of the Church. However, it's very important that when we take liturgy seriously, when we take continuity seriously, and the magisterium seriously, we don't want to make an idol out of our own private judgment, and we want to remain obedient and faithful to the church, because we're promised that the bark of Peter is going to be stormy, and we see figures of this in the Gospels. And however, it's really our only hope, when our Lord says, I have the words of life, and whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood has life in them. And if you don't, then you have no life in you. Then the people murmur and they go away. Disciples go away. And he turns to Peter and he says, you haven't gone away. And Peter says, Lord, to whom shall we go? And that's how I feel. And then on another point, because I'm sure in many cases the Sedevacantists probably have a more compelling liturgy, at least. Maybe they even have a better homilies in certain actual Catholic parishes that we see. But I look around and I'm reminded of a line from Hilaire Belloc, great Catholic writer of the 20th century, who said that he is bound. He said it more eloquently than I will, but he said that he is bound to take it as a matter of faith that the Catholic Church is divinely instituted. But for those who do doubt the divine institution of the Catholic Church, one proof of that divine institution is that no other organization conducted with such knavish imbecility would have lasted a fortnight. And so I'm continuing to throw my lot in with Rome, no matter the problems that arise.
It's knavish imbecility that did it, Betsy. Thanks very much for the call. Michael Knowles, our guest. We have to take a very quick break, but we're going to come back and try to get everybody on with Michael before we have to go. Right back with more Catholic Answers Live.